And then the biggest retcon of all, the one that actually matters, and that answers why Rey is cool, right? It answers the biggest question. Why is Rey even a thing? And the answer is because she's Palpatine's granddaughter, which is fantastic. Okay, that's a great reveal. That's great. It's a great scene where Luke does, even though he's dead, right? Luke does this thing that Yoda does while he's alive in Empire. Remember in Empire, there's this scene where Yoda raises the X-Wing from the swamp because Luke fails to do so. Here, Luke is able to do that as a Force ghost to hand over the X-Wing to Rey. That's great. The callback scene where they find the old Death Star from Return of the Jedi, and Rey has to confront herself, which is another callback to Empire. And then when they're playing the old musical cues, right, all that stuff is great.
So today I wanted to make like a bit of a fun video, I guess. And it's mainly because I've just been thinking about the sequel trilogy in Star Wars a bit more. And I made some comments on a live stream about right-wing Star Wars YouTubers. I might make another video on that one day. I've made one like 3 years ago. And it's about Ben Shapiro's Star Wars opinions. And also just like how they kind of say a lot about conservative politics and why conservatives are so bad at making their own movies and stuff. And I just want to talk about all of that in the wake of Adam Driver's comments that, yes, clearly what happened in the Rise of Skywalker wasn't ever planned, and the plan was actually for Kylo Ren to be the main baddie in the whole sequel trilogy, and they changed that. And I think it also says so much that Ben Shapiro likes the Rise of Skywalker, and in my opinion, not only is it by far the worst Star Wars movie, I think it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. Like, I've seen it once, that's enough. I knew it was terrible from the first 5 minutes, and yeah, it's a joke. It's like it was written by prequel memes on Reddit. That's how bad it was. I'm going to talk a bit more about how bad it is. And just to start with, I don't personally like any of the sequel films, really. Like, I can admit that some of them are better movies in like a vacuum than some of the older movies, like the prequels. But I also just don't like them as much because, you know, how I feel like they fit in with Star Wars generally, I don't think is very good. And I don't think it's bad if you like the first two, Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I think they're okay. But if you like Rise of Skywalker, I have to question just everything about you. Like, if you don't hate that movie, there's something wrong with you, because it is just absolute garbage. Fan service in the worst way. Fan service that doesn't make sense is just the worst kind of pandering. But again, that's why Ben Shapiro likes this movie. And I've been seeing something recently on Star Wars YouTube generally as well. Like, there's this guy called Star Wars Theory, and he's recently been collaborating with the far right, like just far right nerd YouTubers like Ryan Kinnell. And then you have Ben Shapiro also collabing with the Critical Drinker as well. And you're seeing like these two things come together. And something that is really interesting to me, what they always say, is that Disney has ruined Star Wars. And when they say that, they're not talking about the sequel films, because a lot of them like The Rise of Skywalker, which is bizarre. A lot of them are hating on Andor. And when I watch Andor, I'm like, that is like the best Star Wars has ever been. Like, that's the best thing that's ever come out of Star Wars. It's everything you like about it. And it's actually just like really, really well written. I always said I wanted some sort of political Star Wars, like maybe a House of Cards type thing. And then I realized the guy who wrote the prison arc in Andor near the end, he's the guy who created House of Cards, basically, which I think is an amazing show, especially the first 2 seasons. So it's everything I've really wanted. But then you have people like Star Wars Theory, who, when it came out, I remember watching his review, he liked Rise of Skywalker. He's saying Andor puts him to sleep.
Okay, don't get me wrong. I liked Andor. I liked it. It was a good show. It was fine. It was cozy. It was also extremely boring and made me fall asleep a million times while I was watching it. But it was still a good show. Whatever, I enjoyed it. Just sleepy time, okay? Like, you want to put to sleep? You watch Andor. I'm here for Star Wars, George Lucas, and to protect the legacy because, quite frankly, dude, I'm the only one that keeps doing it.
And that just shows you, like, how stupid Star Wars fans are generally, because what they like often isn't the substance of Star Wars as some sort of like franchise or world, because fundamentally, if you understand where George Lucas was coming from, you kind of appreciate the political messaging of Star Wars, even if you think the movies aren't great.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. We call them Mujahideen.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time?
Yes. We're fighting the largest empire in the world.
Right.
The little guys won.
Right.
And the big, highly technical empire.
The English empire. Right?
The English empire, the American empire, lost.
Just sleepy time, sleepy time, sleepy time.
But these guys, I think, are all just so brainwashed by like the expanded universe, which makes no sense, and a lot of it is just absolute trash. And they think that's what Star Wars should be. And something like Andor comes out, they hate it. So yeah, I want to talk about all of this today. I want to talk about why I hate certain aspects of Disney Star Wars, but why I like a lot of it as well. Like, I genuinely think the Disney era of Star Wars is actually the best era of Star Wars, despite the fact I hate the sequel trilogy with a passion. And I'm just going to use Ben Shapiro's own opinions to like frame this discussion. And also, I'm going to rank my favorite Star Wars films, not projects, because I think the TV shows are way better than most of the films. But let me know in the comments, what is your top 3 and what is your bottom 3? And if Rise of Skywalker isn't in your bottom 3, there is something wrong with you. It has to be bottom 3, and it has to be bottom. It has to be the worst one. I'm not accepting any other answer. It is the worst movie of all time, in my opinion. So let's get into this, because recently Adam Driver was on a podcast basically summing up all the problems of the sequel trilogy. So IGN reporting, Kylo Ren's redemption wasn't planned in Star Wars sequel trilogy. Driver was on the Rich Elson show and he talked about this. So he said, I had an overall arc in mind that J.J. Abrams came up with in The Force Awakens, which then changed. His idea was almost the opposite journey of Darth Vader, where Vader starts the most confident, the most committed to the dark side, and by the last movie, he's the most vulnerable and weak. And he wanted to start at the opposite, where the character was the most confused and vulnerable, and by the end of the 3 movies would be most committed to the dark side. So I think that summarizes like the Rise of Skywalker in a nutshell. It's completely reactionary to fan backlash, right? Where Rian Johnson like really did set up that Kylo Ren is the new bad guy, because it got such a backlash by people like Ben Shapiro and other right-wingers, they completely changed it. And what they turned the whole sequel trilogy into was fan service and pandering in the worst way possible. Not something like The Mandalorian where you see Luke Skywalker, like that kind of fan service which makes sense and is understandable. No, the fan service of, the Emperor is back, but he's also Rey's grandfather. But Rey's father is a clone of Palpatine. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Skipping over, like, any context that Palpatine shouldn't have been in this trilogy because they've never set him up. He just randomly pops up because of fan service. And he's literally saying stuff like, do it. And he's saying, that stuff he says about, the Force, the dark side of the Force is a way to stuff that many find unnatural, like what he says to Anakin in episode 3, right? Like, it's absolutely just, when you hear that in the cinema, my eyes were rolling so hard. I'm like, oh my God, this is a load of absolute garbage. Like, what am I watching right now? And then the final battle when he's force lightning loads of stuff and there's loads of Star Destroyers that have all been hidden away. It's literally like a fever dream. It's literally like someone's fan fiction of what should happen after Return of the Jedi. It's so unimaginably bad, and also blatantly retconning everything from the previous movie is just insane. Like Kylo Ren saying, oh yeah, I lied about you being a nobody, you're actually a Palpatine. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. It's so bad. And anyone who likes that is an idiot. And anyone who likes that is someone who wants to be pandered to and wants, like, basically, in the conservative mindset, you want the same thing again. You want the same thing again. And Ben Shapiro has said constantly, he said that his problem with the sequels isn't about the nostalgia bait. He likes that, actually. It's that it was caught in 2 minds. Do you do the nostalgia bait or do you do something new?
Instead, what they chose to do was split the baby. We'll introduce new characters, but we'll live off the nostalgia for the first films. You can't do that. And the reason you can't do that is because if you're nostalgic for the first films, you don't want to see bad things happen to your favorite childhood characters. Spoiler alert, no one wants to see Han Solo die at the hands of his son like a loser divorced dad after leaving Leia alone for 20 years and flying around the galaxy smoking pot with Chewie in the Millennium Falcon. No one wants to see that. And that's what happens in Force Awakens. No one wants to see Luke, who is this hero who goes from being a whiny teenager to being this mature Jedi who is able to control himself to save his father. Nobody wants to see Luke become a misanthrope who milks aliens on a foreign planet while whining about his life and disparaging the Jedi tradition.
But yeah, Rise of Skywalker, terrible. And I feel like Disney massively misstepped with that. But I will say, Andor, some seasons of The Mandalorian, the new season of The Clone Wars under Disney, like the last 2 episodes, that's literally the best Star Wars, in my opinion. Order 66, from Ahsoka's point of view, I think is like some of the best Star Wars. The Ahsoka show, I really liked as just something new, because like it's been a long time since we've had something in Star Wars, since The Force Awakens, that was like, oh, we have a blank canvas basically to do whatever we want. And I actually really liked it. I liked, all the effort you could see in the design of stuff, like the samurai influence. I like Dave Filoni's world building a lot as well, even though I don't like everything. Like, people love that Balin character and Shin Hati, and I'm like, they're just nothing. Like, what is even their characters? Like, Balin's kind of cool. Like, aesthetically, they're cool, but it was cool seeing, like, the Rebels stuff continue, because I really like Star Wars Rebels. I like the Clone Wars for what they were. And yeah, Mandalorian, Andor, Obi-Wan had some moments, not great though, but yeah, I think generally Disney Star Wars is better than prequel Star Wars. And if I have to choose something to watch, I'm watching Rogue One and Andor rather than anything else, because in my opinion, that's the best. But yeah, now let's get into my tier list versus Ben Shapiro's tier list. Now, on the surface, I'm not that disagreeable with his tier list, apart from where the Rise of Skywalker is. So in his top 10, he said Empire Strikes Back first, which I think most people would put number 1. A New Hope second, respectable. Rogue One third, respectable. Revenge of the Sith fourth. I agree with the high rankings of them two. Return of the Jedi afterwards. Rise of Skywalker being sixth is unforgivable though. Then you have Solo, Attack of the Clones, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, The Phantom Menace. And in my opinion, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, they got to be higher. Rise of Skywalker has to be bottom. But then I'm not disagreeing too much with the top 5 there. And I actually pretty much agree. So here's my own list. Rogue One first, Revenge of the Sith second, Empire Strikes Back third, Return of the Jedi fourth, New Hope fifth, Force Awakens sixth, Last Jedi seventh, Phantom Menace eighth, Solo ninth, Attack of the Clones 10th, Rise of Skywalker. And the thing is, I don't really hate any of these movies. I hate a lot of the decisions, and I hate what the sequel trilogy is fundamentally, just literally recycled storytelling from the original trilogy. So I hate that. But as movies on their own, I don't think The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are necessarily bad movies. I think they're entertaining movies. I think, they're well made in their own ways. It's just that everything in them is completely taken from the old trilogy and recycled, right? That's my main problems with it. But even Attack of the Clones, I don't, absolutely hate either. And especially with the prequels, what I always liked about them is they are original stories and they had something to say about society. They were literally a response to the George Bush presidency, Attack of the Clones, especially Revenge of the Sith. George Lucas even said this. He said Darth Vader and Palpatine are Dick Cheney and George Bush, right? I think Palpatine's meant to be Dick Cheney. So he wasn't hiding it. And he always said Star Wars was political. The Viet Cong were the inspirations for the rebellion. The Empire was meant to be the US government, right? And Richard Nixon was the inspiration for the Emperor in the original trilogy, right? Always been political, always been left-wing. I've always enjoyed their political messaging. George Lucas, I think, is a talented guy. And because I'm of that generation, Revenge of the Sith is the tone I want for Star Wars. And I'm really happy with Rogue One in that what it did is it took the tone of Revenge of the Sith and it brought in the old trilogy into that. And that's the best combination because you have the aesthetic of the old trilogy, this old 1970s, 1980s retro futurism, and in some ways not strictly retro futurism that you see traditionally, but this old style of sci-fi where everything seems pretty old even though it is science fiction. So I really like that aesthetic. It's gritty. I really like the more focus on the hard parts of Rebellion, which Andor carried on. For me, that's just the best of Star Wars, and I'm playing Jedi Survivor right now. Absolutely love that as well. And what I like so much about it is also the blend of all this stuff. Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order, which I didn't like as a game, but I like the story. I like how it blends everything together. And it feels like it's very much a part of the world. Also, the one thing I like about Star Wars world building in the Disney era compared to the MCU is you don't have to know stuff for it to make sense. But if you know stuff, it enhances it. So Dathomir in Fallen Order is a wasteland because of what General Grievous did to it in the Clone Wars, right? But if you just go there, it's just eerie. You see the Zabrak Darth Maul, but you understand the context better if you've seen the Clone Wars. And in Jedi Survivor, if you've watched the Kenobi show, you've seen the Path before, this, underground group to get Force sensitives to safety or enemies of the Empire. But you don't have to have watched Obi-Wan to understand what it is because it's pretty well explained, right? But it just enhances everything if you know about stuff and you've watched the wider stuff. But as standalone things, sometimes I think they do a good job of you don't need to know this. And I think Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order are good examples of that, and I like how they blend it all together. So for me, that's peak Star Wars. Jedi Survivor, Rogue One, Andor. That's what I like the best. Mandalorian, maybe a bit under that. But yeah, that for me is peak Star Wars. Just post Revenge of the Sith, pre New Hope. For me, that's the best. But now I just want to get into what the problem is with right-wing criticism of Star Wars. And I want to focus on Ben Shapiro here, but it can be applied to like Star Wars Theory, all these like right-wing Star Wars YouTubers. Again, doesn't make sense to me too much because Star Wars is left-wing fundamentally. No wonder some of them don't like Andor. Ben Shapiro reviewed The Last Jedi, and he talks about just like the sequels in general. And I think it's so telling, like his opinions of this and what his problems are. Because I will totally accept people's opinions of the sequel trilogy, of just being like fundamentally being very uninspired, very corporate, and fundamentally trying to appeal to people like Ben Shapiro. Because people don't remember when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they didn't want to do anything with the prequels. And that's why you had that Star Wars Battlefront game, which was only focused on the old trilogy. And then you had everything cancelled, apart from Star Wars Rebels. That was the only new thing. And that was focused on like the old trilogy era kind of as well. And then you have all these sequel films, which just rehashed old trilogy with old trilogy characters. They fundamentally thought everyone who's a fan of Star Wars only likes this, not realizing that you have people like my generation, a bit younger. We don't like the old trilogy as much as older people. We like all the other stuff, like Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith. We like the old video games and stuff. We don't fundamentally like the old trilogy that much. But Ben Shapiro is a guy who does. So let's listen to his criticism, because I think it also just says a lot about like the conservative mindset when both consuming media and the world they fundamentally want. So let's watch.
The biggest problem with the entire series is what they can't decide in Star Wars land whether they want it to benefit from nostalgia, whether they want to make it a nostalgia-centric series, or they want to launch something new. And so they decided to do both. And what they ended up doing in the process was killing all of the old things in preparation for the new. And that's nasty to my childhood, okay? I come for the nostalgia because I thought that the first, the new episodes that George Lucas made were terrible. The stuff I like is episode 4, 5, 6, right? The stuff that everybody likes is New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Couldn't care less about Phantom Menace or Revenge of the Sith or any of that crap. Okay, 4, 5, and 6 is where it's at. So I grew up with Han Solo. I grew up with Luke Skywalker. I grew up with Princess Leia. In fact, my sister's middle name, one of my sister's middle names is Leia because I was such a big Star Wars fan, because my parents asked me what I thought her middle name should be, and I picked Leia because I was a big Star Wars fan. Okay, so I am a huge Star Wars nut. In the last movie, they killed off Han Solo for no reason. They turned Han Solo, who is one of the coolest, most roguish figures who becomes honorable in film lore, they turn him into a loser single dad who can't hold his crap together and gets killed by his whiny brat son for no reason at all. My biggest problem now is that I actually think this is the end of the Star Wars universe. I think that this is actually I think that this is the end of where Star Wars can go. Because now all the old characters are dead. We've reached the end of the Skywalker family, essentially. Like, Ben Solo is a thing, I guess, but Kylo is his own sort of character, and they're going to kill Kylo in the next film for sure. So why would I show up to watch a movie without Luke? Leia's dead, right? In real life, Carrie Fisher's dead. Han is dead. Where are they going to go from here?
So I think this both says a lot about conservatives' views of stuff generally, but also Star Wars fans. Like, he feels some sort of ownership of these characters, and doing bad things to these characters is like fundamentally bad. And he's going to say this again in a Rise of Skywalker review. Like, he can't accept this. The movie is just bad because bad things happen to Han Solo and Luke, right? Even if the movie was amazing, it's still bad because it happens to these characters, because it's like action figures, isn't it? Like, they feel ownership. They want good things to happen because it's your childhood, right? It's all wrapped up in nostalgia. You don't think about these characters' journeys. You don't think about, what can happen to them potentially. And yeah, I totally get not liking what happens to these characters. I'm not going to tell you I sat around thinking the end for Luke Skywalker was great, right? I thought the end for Han Solo was fine, personally. I didn't have a problem with that. Also, Harrison Ford ain't going to do 3 Star Wars movies coming back either. The Luke Skywalker one I didn't personally like either. But again, I don't have like some super attachment where I feel like I have to personally insert myself and like change the direction of these characters. And I can totally overlook these problems if the movie is like actually good. And the problem with these movies is, although they're fine on their own, as Star Wars movies, they fail in a lot of ways because they're just boring rehashes, right? But again, they feel ownership and they feel like this reactionary impulse that if you do something bad to something they like, that is bad in itself. And at the end, he says, why would I go watch one of these movies if these characters aren't there? But like that in itself, he's not saying, oh my God, John Boyega, Ray, they're so terrible, I can't watch another movie with them. It's literally like, well, I got no desire to see these movies because I just want to be pandered to. And that's going to come up with his Rise of Skywalker review. Because like I said, this is the reactionary impulse that drove the Rise of Skywalker, you had people like this saying, you've ruined my favorite characters. You've ruined my childhood. I've heard people, even Ben Shapiro, as I've been researching this video, he said they've ruined his childhood. They've ruined it. You can't go back and watch those movies anymore because what they've done to the characters is ruined them. But yeah, like I said, he said this before. But now he has his Rise of Skywalker review. And like, first of all, him liking this is bad in itself. But the fact that he likes Rey being a Palpatine is just so insane to me. Like, I think that is one of the worst things that has ever happened in Star Wars, that Rey's a Palpatine. Because first of all, it doesn't really even make sense in the movie because it was never set up. Second of all, he's her granddad, which you also have to have another leap in logic. Then, like, when did Palpatine have a son? And you find out later in, like, I don't know what it was, like some comic or something, that in canon, that Rey's dad is a good clone of Palpatine. And that's where we're at with the sequel trilogy, right? The hero's father is a good clone of the main villain of the 6 movies. And that's good. That's good to conservatives because you're linking it back to the old trilogy. I'm not joking, that's why he likes it. So let's have a look at various different segments of his review of Rise of Skywalker from, like, 4 years ago.
Okay, so all of this is prefaced to say I hated Force Awakens and I hated Last Jedi. Rise of Skywalker is an attempt to buy all of that back. And understanding that this trilogy never should have happened, and understanding all the flaws of Force Awakens and Last Jedi, now you understand why I liked Rise of Skywalker, because they attempt to correct as many of these problems as they can while apologizing for the series ever existing, which is basically the stuff that's really good. Okay, the stuff that's really good is actually quite good. The stuff that's good is that they buy back Han Solo's death. They give him sort of a new exit scene where he's not being killed by his son. You're told in this movie that Leia was trained as a Jedi by Luke, which makes sense, right? In the books, she actually is. Right? In the books, she actually is trained as a Jedi by Luke. And that she decided not to become a Jedi at the last minute because she foresaw using the Force that if she became a Jedi, then her lightsaber would be used to kill Ben. Okay, so that all makes sense. So they retconned that. And then the biggest retcon of all, the one that actually matters, and that answers why Rey is cool. Right? It answers the biggest question. Why is Rey even a thing? And the answer is because she's Palpatine's granddaughter, which is fantastic. Okay, that's a great reveal. That's great. They bring in all the old musical cues. They bring in all of the old stuff, which is the stuff that I like. So if you're a nostalgia person, right, if you're pissed at this series because you feel like it ruined your childhood, then this movie was an attempt to restore that. It was an attempt to make Han cool again. Fairly successful. It was an attempt to make Leia cool again. Successful. It was an attempt to make Luke cool. There's a great scene where Luke does, even though he's dead, right? Luke does this thing that Yoda does while he's alive in Empire. Remember in Empire, there's this scene where Yoda raises the X-Wing from the swamp because Luke fails to do so. Here, Luke is able to do that as a Force ghost to hand over the X-Wing to Rey. That's great. The callback scene where they find the old Death Star from Return of the Jedi, and Rey has to confront herself, which is another callback to Empire. And then when they're playing the old musical cues, right, all that stuff is great. What they do with Kylo Ren, bringing him back to the light side, is pretty great.
So, like I said at the start, his list isn't that objectionable apart from the Rise of Skywalker being high, but the Rise of Skywalker being high shows that his opinions on Star Wars generally are pretty terrible.
I'm gonna go off the board. You ready for this one? Rogue One. Yeah, I know, a lot of people want to put Revenge of the Sith or ROTJ, Return of the Jedi, on this list at this point. I go Rogue One. I think Rogue One is an actually really well-made film. Rogue One is fascinating. It has just enough tips of the hat to the original Star Wars trilogy to draw you in.
Even his positive opinion of Rogue One is mainly because it has a lot of nostalgic elements from A New Hope, right? It's not because it's an interesting story about, like, rebellion and revolution and, you know, the complexities of that. It's just because, things look like my childhood. And in this, like, him saying, you know, I don't want bad things to happen to these characters, and saying, like, everything they did with Han Solo, bringing him back, Luke Skywalker bringing him back, Princess Leia having her, like, in a flashback, that's all good because it's making your favorite characters cool again. But it's just fan service to make you try and like the movie, which is inherently absolutely garbage. And, like, you know, the conservative worldview, they like this bloodline stuff. We've been talking about that lately with Matt Walsh saying that, you know, if you don't have children, you fail your bloodline and ancestors. Well, conservatives absolutely love this, like, bloodline stuff. That Rey's power only comes because she's related to the most powerful, like, Force user ever in, like, Star Wars new canon and stuff, right? And that's the only reason she's cool, because she's related to Palpatine. Not a cool character at all, but it redeems her character, even though I think personally her character is pretty terrible. There's really just nothing to her at all. The Palpatine stuff makes her infinitely worse. Like, Rey was more interesting when she was a nobody, now she's a somebody. It's so much worse just on the surface. And when you dig in a little deeper, it's just absolutely insane nonsense. Like I said, written by prequel memes. And then you have the stuff about the implication that one of those surviving stormtroopers is Lando's daughter. Why? Why does this come into it at all? Who wrote that? It's just so bad on every single level. It's such a failure on every single level. And also, like, against his opinion, the fan service is a sign of Star Wars, and that instance being dead. It's a corpse for money. And you just made this movie as a pure capitalist product to appeal to people like Ben Shapiro who want this nostalgia bait. And that's all they think is good. Musical cues. You see your faves back. That's it. And that can make a movie good. It's just nostalgia bait. It's the Ready Player One-ification of all this stuff where you just throw in stuff people recognize and hope they think it's a good movie, right? That is Rise of Skywalker. Fundamentally terrible. Nothing to say about anything, which it goes completely against Lucas Star Wars. And just a fucking terrible movie all around. Absolute garbage. An insult. An insult to filmmaking, an insult to George Lucas, an insult to Star Wars, an insult to everything. It's so bad. So bad. I hate this movie so much. It is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. And to hear someone praise the worst parts of it, and a guy who actually helps make movies now and failed in Hollywood, I think that explains so much. This is why he failed in Hollywood. Because he has opinions like this. He doesn't think this movie is hot garbage. He thinks it's good. And he thinks, again, the worst parts of it are the good parts. And again, fundamentally plays into the conservative mindset. Like, how much propaganda for conservatives is nostalgia bait about some imagined past where everything was better? I've been seeing so much of this recently, and I made a video about it, about like the Roman Empire or like the 1950s family, trad wife stuff. It's all about this imagined past where things were better because it catered more to your personality or sensibilities. And it's the same with Ben Shapiro's Star Wars opinions, is that Star Wars movies are bad when they do something new. Star Wars movies are good when they rehash the exact same shit as before and pander to fans of the old trilogy who didn't really analyze anything to do with it properly and didn't understand the political themes. And that's why I feel like I see so many like clickbait videos about how Disney has killed Star Wars. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, it's killed Star Wars if the only thing you like about it is the old trilogy. Then maybe it has. But I'm like, everything I like about Star Wars has been enhanced, made better. And for me, I like Star Wars more than ever because it has actually good stuff, which personally I like. But it's not pandering. It's completely new. Like, Andor is something you've never seen in Star Wars before. Even though it's a, prequel to Rogue One, you've never seen this type of thing before. Even like the politics of the internal, I think it's the ISB, the Imperial Intelligence Service, that's so interesting. The acting is so good as well. The real locations, everything to do with like revolution, this character's own struggle, it's just so good. And thankfully, that's because Rogue One existed in the first place and took something like the old trilogy and made it very serious. And made it very serious like the themes you get in the prequel trilogy, right? And it's the best blend. It's the best blend of both Lucas's trilogies. And it's got a new spin, a new mature spin, a new serious spin. But there's still room for more like Flash Gordon style serial stuff with some of the other stuff like Mandalorian, right? And also, let's just not make that Rey movie. No one cares. Your one interesting character was Kylo Ren, and he's gone. Rey is not interesting, and she's made worse by Rise of Skywalker. So that is it. Ben Shapiro's wrong. I'm right. I'm the Star Wars king. Star Wars right-wing YouTubers are also dumb as well and have bad opinions. Only me, communist Kavernacle, has good opinions on Star Wars because I'm basically the successor to George Lucas, but I'm a YouTuber. Anyway, that is the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.